I remember being elected to the European Parliament and being on a stage with you in 1999.
That's
and
right.
Different parties, different positions, but we'll talk a bit.
You promised that you were going to go in with no expenses at all, and then we found you in a six-star hotel. Nobody did a six-star hotel at all anyway.
Well, what I did actually was to give lots of the expenses to good causes. And then I was told that was effectively fraud.
Absolutely.
And they'd fine me. So, I mean, the whole thing was amazing.
Well, come on, I'm looking for good cause collections tonight.
Well,
I've just come back from Ukraine.
I know.
I'm desperately anxious about the children.
We're going to talk about Ukraine,
right.
I promise. Now, Emma, you come from the political aristocracy, don't you?
Totally. Utterly.
Yeah.
Except that women have never been any aristocracy at all in politics. We're always below the ledge.
Well,
begging.
Well, we have had Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister, and we've had Theresa May as... So things have changed in the last...
Yes, I mean, but that's the Conservative Party
years.
for you. We get very unusual people forward. That, I think, is one of our distinctive features from the other parties.
Well, I was going to say that you know, you come from this political aristocracy. Members of your family for centuries going back have been in Parliament. So I was thinking, in that way, Emma's a bit like the Churchill family, because they've always been around in politics. But then I realised...
We've been there longer. Much longer.
But then I realised you're even more like Churchill in one way, because you were a Conservative, and then you joined the Liberal Democrats, and then, just like Churchill, you rejoined the Conservatives.
Correct.
Which makes me ask, what was the philosophy behind your political career?
Well,
that
maybe
led you to
I looked
change?
up Churchill's career, because he did exactly the same.
He did. I know he did. I know he did.
Well, I have to say my family were very annoyed indeed. They've said, well, Conservatives, what the heck are you doing? So I said, well, you know, that's life. And my poor husband put up with everything. You know, he was very good about it. He just wanted to be left alone and, you know, not be fussed with all this politics, which he said was a great distraction from the free market, which was his big passion.
No, he's right.
Well, absolutely.
The more government there is, the less free market.
That's exactly what he said.
I mean, Emma, I think the reason...
I don't mind what you do politically, but for God's sake, keep them all away from me. My business only works with no government interference at all.
That was what Ronald Reagan used to say. Absolutely. That to the Americans. But Emma, I think the reason... I think the reason that you left the Conservatives, joined the Lib Dems, is that you, unlike me, you were a big believer in the European Union, and that was quite a central part of your political philosophy.
I've always believed in cooperation rather than confrontation. And having been grown up just after the war, when there was Auschwitz coming, you know, and all these politicians in the family, we knew all too much about it all as it went through. I could say that you had to persuade people to get on. It didn't mean that we should have to lose our independence, and that, of course, is what has taken us out of the EU, because we can't have other parliaments telling our parliament what to do. But we do need the continental colleagues to get together and to get on with each other and not to fight. They seem to have this extraordinary capacity to fight at the drop of a hat. And we don't have that.
So, OK.
It's because we're an island,
OK.
probably.
So are you... How can I put it? Are you reconciled to Brexit? Do you accept that it's happened and there's no going back?
Well, I have to tell you that when I got to Brussels, I couldn't understand how Britain had lasted there for so long.
But you were a Liberal Democrat.
Well, I can't help that. I was in a rage with the Conservative Party, and I'm certainly not going Labour. But you see, when I was smaller, lobbying and campaigning with my father in his constituency of Farnham, I remember going around with 3 uncles, a brother-in-law and a father, knocking on the doors, suggesting people to join the European Union, because that's what they felt was the right thing to do. And I had a question I couldn't answer, and I ran back and asked the great men, what should I say? For the first time in my political life ever, father and uncles, and I can't remember about my brother-in-law, I better not denigrate him on this, you know, he's still alive, but they all said, you can't answer that, for goodness sake, don't try to answer it. If we tell the population the truth, they will never join the European Union, and we need to be there now. Because the question was, will this Parliament override our Parliament? I wasn't allowed to answer.
So the whole thing was based on an untruth, really?
The whole thing was based on the belief, which I think was true, certainly it proved true, that we were very, very broke indeed.
Which we
and
were.
we needed this market.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, you see, before we joined, after we agreed to join, or before we joined, they changed the rules, and we somehow didn't notice, or we chose to ignore it. And it turned, far from being a free market, it turned out to be a closed market. So it wasn't exactly what my relations wanted. It wasn't what any of us wanted. We wanted a proper free market.
This is revelatory to me.
Well, that's because of my great antiquity. I was there at the time.
And
I have to tell you, in 1988-9, when I got into the Commons, I was popped on a committee for computer software copyright, which was absolutely grist to my milk, because I'd spent 11 years in the computer industry and nobody else had. They didn't know what they were talking about. Tony Blair was leading the opposition, by the way, and Mr. Butcher, MP, was leading for the government. And they all absolutely, totally got it wrong, so I had to get them to turn it upside down, completely upside down, withdraw the bill and begin again. They didn't know what they were talking about. So I went round to see the department, and they said, oh, don't worry, it doesn't matter. I said, well, look here, we've got to be in line, in cinch. In fact, we should be leading the European Union on this. Oh, don't even worry about that. Why not? Oh, because our law overrides theirs anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm terribly sorry. I think you've got it wrong. No, we're the officials, and the minister says the same. I was so stunned. I rushed off to the House of Commons library and looked everything up, and of course I was right.
Yeah, yeah.
We laboured under a delusion that we were not under their control, and we were.
Yeah.
That's why I was amazed that we lasted for so long.
No. Well, it took a long time for the truth to really get out, I think, to a big audience. Emma, you've served in the House of Commons. You did 10 years in Brussels and Strasbourg. You're now in the House of Lords, and you've done all these things despite having quite a profound degree of deafness.
I was born profoundly deaf, almost 100% deaf.
Yeah.
But it's just a fact of life. And I also went nearly blind when I was 9. That's never come back. So my communication skills are pretty mad. And I think it's quite a good idea as a member of the House of Commons to understand.
But the question I want to ask is, how have you overcome those difficulties? How have you managed to do this?
Well, I lip-read.
Yes.
The worst place I've ever worked in, and I say this quite profoundly and on purpose, is in the House of Lords. They take no trouble at all. I've been in paid employment since I was 21.
Yeah.
All the way up the line, people have immediately helped, given way, given all the rest of it. The House of Lords is the worst place for disability of any kind that I've ever been in.
Really?
Yes, it's very, very odd, and I keep pressing it. And the other disabled peers, like George Shinquin, like Baroness Thompson, they feel exactly the same. I don't know how to bring the House of Lords up to speed on this.
Well,
totally failed.
I wonder, though, is the House of Lords really credible anymore?
We must have a second chamber.
Yes.
We've got to have a second chamber.
I agree with that.
I think the lack of credibility comes from the Prime Ministers appointing too many people. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. If you look at Nick Clegg, for example, it's absolutely mad that he persuaded Cameron to appoint 110 or something Lib Dem peers. Well, why? When there were hardly any members of Parliament for the Lib Dem party. So I think that's a huge weak spot, and that's got to be addressed. But we must have a second chamber, and I believe it should be non-elected second chamber, because having two elected chambers fighting each other will help nobody.
Well, you're right, and that's always been the great dilemma, that two elected chambers would battle for supremacy.
We used to have a unicameral set up, as you know, for over 100 years. We were unicameral.
Yeah.
We stopped that, I think, at about 1340. So we had unicameral for over 100 years.
Yeah.
But we had a bit of everything in there. I'd quite like that. I think it's tremendous fun.
I think I'd go for an elected second chamber, but it's not.
No.
Yes, of course. It's too comfortable for all of you.
No, it's not that. I love being elected. It's much, much more fun being elected. Far more challenging, keeps you far more awake and much more enjoyable.
There you are.
But I think you have to have a balance of something different. And I think the appointed, if you can get the appointment system much tougher and tighter, and allowing maybe prime ministers just a few in their back pocket, they've got to have something to give away. We're not allowed to bribe in our society. They have to give something.
What's the difference?
Well, it's the numbers. It's the numbers. Huge numbers.
Wow.
Look what Nick Clegg did. It was quite wicked. I mean, he drenched the House of Lords with people.
Yeah.
It wasn't right. It was a one-party rule in a very weird way. And I think it's very important to have a second chamber, and yes, I think it should be appointed.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the crossbenchers, you'll never find them standing for Parliament. And they are outstanding, some of them.
Well,
all of them.
It's a defence of the House of Lords, but I want to move on if I can, because you've always involved yourself with charity and humanitarian campaigns and causes. And I saw some pictures the other day, and there you were in Ukraine. So tell us what you're doing, please.
I'm terribly unhappy about every aspect of Ukraine. But if you just look at children, they have, I think it's 7.3 million children, 7.6 million children in Ukraine. 2/3 of those have been dumped, left out, have been thrown out. 2/3 of all Ukrainian children are not at home. They haven't got their homes any longer. And inside all of that, there's a huge volume of child trafficking. I've done a large amount of work for decades, largely from the European Parliament, actually.
I remember.
In Romania, and children also in Georgia, in Moldova, in Armenia, and in Russia. And I know what's going on in Ukraine. And thousands of children have been deported from Ukraine. Even worse, if you think of it that way around, possibly worse, Russia has stolen 110,000 children from Ukraine. It's taken them,
Really?
Yes, and it's taken them to Russia, and it's taking their identity away and making them Russian. So they won't see their parents ever again.
Wow.
So people like me are needed in Ukraine.
Is that happening? Are the children going from the eastern provinces, or yes?
Yes.
And these are contested areas, aren't they?
No, these children will never see their parents again.
Wow.
And they're being forced to be Russian. This is against every single principle of human rights. So I'm needed there, and people like me, and a lot more people like me. My team come from Romania, where we've actually managed to do what we set out to do in the beginning, which is bring society together and not have children being chucked out because they're somehow the wrong size, style, background. They've got a tiny little hair lip or something. All of that is now in the past.
Well,
and we've done that in Romania, so we now want those Romanian principles to come into the wider Ukraine.
Well, you've got a very big job on your hands.
I need some support.
I know. Well, there we are. You can all help. Where do people go if they want to support you?
They go to the Amar Foundation, AMAR.
Yep.
And we've got a website, and I've got some Twitters out, and they can chuck anything in. You know, it doesn't matter if it's just £5. Anything at the moment is better than nothing for Ukrainian children. They are a huge risk, and an awful lot of thousands have gone already. We'll never see them again.
Emma Nicholson, thank you for joining me on Talking Pints.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.